Oh, hello, come in. Hi, come on in. Hi, nice to see you. I've got the Peterson Church Warden out now, my talking pipe that I bought in Oxford with some of the funds I was given for a lecture on talking. Now, I mentioned when you were here the other day and we read that glorious description of Bilbo's first encounter with Smaug the dragon, that at various points Tolkien was tipping his cap to the Beowulf poet. Tolkien, of course, was a professor of Anglo-Saxon, so naturally he knew Beowulf back to front, the wonderful early alliterative Old English poem. And there's a passage towards the end of that where a dragon comes and lays the place to waste and then keeps his treasure in a hoard, in a barrow, and somebody goes in and steals the cup, which of course is exactly what happens in The Hobbit. And again, just as in The Hobbit, the dragon notices the cup is gone and comes out and scours the land. But then that's followed by, the role of the king, the ring giver, the provider and protector of his people, to go out and fight the dragon. And by this time, Beowulf, who'd become king through his heroic endeavours, quelling them, destroying the monsters, the monster Grendel, it's up to him to go out, hopefully with his hand-picked thanes, to do it. And there's a magnificent description of what turns out to be his last battle. He kills the dragon, but he dies in the course of it. And all the thanes' shield wall run away, except for one man, Wiglaf, who assists him. And it's a glorious description, and it's a perfect picture of the sort of heroic code of the Anglo-Saxons. But there's great dragon description. Anyway, when I came up to Cambridge to read literature and specialised in medieval literature, I decided to do the optional Anglo-Saxon paper. And I was taught at one point by T.A. Shippey, who himself was a great Tolkien expert who'd been taught by Tolkien. So I felt there was a bit of a kind of a handing on. Anyway, the real thrill for me came when there have been various translations of Beowulf. The best ones keep the alliteration. But then came the day when I read that the great Seamus Heaney, a poet whom I admired and followed closely, had made a translation of Beowulf. And I thought I'd lost my copy. But while I was looking around for my copy of Masefield, which I didn't find, I found the Beowulf. So I thought it might be fun to read this great account of the dragon and give you a taste, because Heaney, being a poet himself, is really sensitive to the sound and the metre and the alliteration. And alliteration is the very core of Anglo-Saxon poetry. Just for fun, I'll read you a bit of the opening of Beowulf in Anglo-Saxon, just so you get the sound of it in Anglo-Saxon. Hwet, we gardena in yardam, theod kinga, thrim gefrunen, hutha ethelingas, ellen fremedon. You'll notice ethelingas here. Anyway, so the spear days gone by, and the kings who ruled them had courage and greatness. We have heard of those princes' heroic campaigns, is how Heaney translates it. He won the Whitbread Prize for this, and he dedicated it to the original anonymous Beowulf poet. Anyway, I'm not going to read it in Anglo-Saxon. I can't remember my Anglo-Saxon pronunciation properly anyway. It's a long time ago. But I'm going to read you Heaney's wonderful English translation, and you'll hear the rhythm and the wonderful alliteration. So I'm going to take you to the moment when Beowulf himself fights the dragon. There's some glorious descriptions of the dragon breathing fire around the landscape earlier on, but let's just get to this bit. It's just fantastic. So the he here is Beowulf. Then he drew himself up beside his shield, the fabled warrior in his war shirt and helmet, trusted in his own strength entirely, and went under the crag, no coward path. Hard by the rock face, that hale veteran, a good man who had gone repeatedly into combat and danger and come through, saw a stone arch and a gushing stream that burst from the barrow, blazing and wafting a deadly heat. It would be hard to survive unscathed near the hoard, to hold firm against the dragon, whose flaming depths, in those flaming depths, Then he gave a shout. The Lord of the Geats unburdened his breast and broke out in a storm of anger. Under the grey stone his voice challenged and resounded clearly. Hate was ignited. The Horde Guard recognised a human voice. It's a wonderful example of a Saxon kenning. They never quite call the dragon a dragon. He's called the Horde Guard or the Mound Guard or the Fire Breath, or, So he's the Horde Guard at the moment. The Horde Guard recognised a human voice. The time was over for peace and parleying. Pouring forth in a hot battle fume, the breath of the monster burst from the rock. There was a rumble underground, down there in the barrow. Beowulf the warrior lifted his shield. The outlandish thing writhed and convulsed and viciously turned on the king, whose keen-edged sword, an heirloom inherited by ancient right, was already in his hand. Roused to a fury, each antagonist struck terror in the other. Unyielding, the lord of his people loomed by his tall shield, sure of his ground, while the serpent looped and unleashed itself. Swaddled in flames, it came gliding and flexing and racing towards its fate. Yet his shield defended the renowned leader's life and limb for a shorter time than he meant it to. That final day was the first time when Beowulf fought and fate denied him glory in battle. So the king of the Geats raised his hand and struck hard at the enamelled scales, but scarcely cut through. The blade flashed and slashed, yet the blow was far less powerful than the hard-pressed king had need of at that moment. The Mound Keeper, the dragon, the Mound Keeper went into a spasm and spouted deadly flames when he felt the stroke. Battle fire billowed and spewed. Beowulf was foiled of a glorious victory. The glittering sword, infallible before that day, failed when he unsheathed it, as it never should have. For the son of Ecgtheow, it was no easy thing to have to give ground like that, and go unwillingly to inhabit another home in a place beyond. So every man must yield the leasehold of his days. Before long the fierce contenders clashed again. The Horde Guard took heart, inhaled and swelled up and got a new wind. He who had once ruled was furled in fire and had to face the worst. No help or backing was to be had then from his high-born comrades. That hand-picked troop broke ranks and ran for their lives to the safety of the wood. But within one heart sorrow welled up. In a man of worth the claims of kinship cannot be denied. His name was Wiglaf, the son of Welstan, a well-regarded Shilfing warrior related to Alfheim. When he saw his lord tormented by the heat of his scalding helmet, he remembered the bountiful gifts bestowed on him, how well he lived among the Waegmundings, the freehold he inherited from his father before him. He could not hold back. One hand brandished the yellow-timbered shield, the other drew his sword, an ancient blade. And, of course, the Beowulf poet then goes on to the whole history of the blade and all this chap's history before. We probably haven't got time to all that. And he makes a great speech to the others who are running, Wiglaf, and says, come on, he is a man who's helped us all our lives, and now the time's to help him. But only Wiglaf remains. So he makes the call and they run away. So let's carry on with Wiglaf coming to help Beowulf now. Then he waded the dangerous reek and went under arms to his lord, saying only, go on, dear Beowulf, do everything you said you would when you were still young, and vowed you would never let your name and fame be dimmed while you lived. Your deeds are famous, so stay resolute, my lord. Defend your life now with the whole of your strength. I shall stand by you. After those words, a wildness rose in the dragon again and drove it to attack, heaving up fire, hunting for enemies, the humans it loathed. Flames lapped the shield, charred it to the boss, and the body armour on the young warrior was useless to him. But Wiglaf did well under the wide rim Beowulf shared with him, once his own had shattered in sparks and ashes. Inspired again by the thought of glory, the War King threw his whole strength behind a sword stroke and connected with the skull. The nagling snapped Beowulf's ancient iron-grey sword. It let him down in the fight. It was never his fortune to be helped in combat by the cutting edge of weapons made of iron. When he wielded a sword, no matter how blooded and hard-edged the blade, his hand was too strong. The stroke he dealt, I have heard, would ruin it. He could reap no advantage. Then the bane of that people, the fire-breathing dragon, was mad to attack for a third time. When a chance came, he caught the hero in a rush of flame and clamped sharp fangs into his neck. Beowulf's body ran wet with his lifeblood. It came welling out. Next thing they say, the noble son of Weohstan saw the king in danger at his side and displayed his inborn bravery and strength. He left the head alone, but his fighting hand was burned when he came to his kinsman's aid. He lunged at the enemy lower down, so that his decorated sword sank into its belly, and the flames grew weaker. Once more the king gathered his strength and drew a stabbing knife he carried on his belt, sharpened for battle. He stuck it deep into the dragon's flank. Beowulf dealt it a deadly wound. They had killed the enemy. Courage quelled his life. That pair of kinsmen, partners in nobility, had destroyed the foe. So every man should act, be at hand when needed. But now for the king this would be the last of his many labours and triumphs in the world. Then the wound, dealt by the ground burner earlier, began to scald and swell. Beowulf discovered deadly poison suppurating inside him, surges of nausea, and so in his wisdom the prince realised his state and proceeded towards a seat on the rampart. He steadied his gaze on those gigantic stones, saw how the earthwork was braced with arches built over columns, and now that thane, unequalled for goodness, with his own hands washed his lord's wounds, swabbed his weary prince with water, bathed him clean, unbuckled his helmet. Beowulf spoke in spite of his mortal wounds. He still spoke, for he well knew his days in the world had been lived out to the end. His allotted time was drawing to a close. Death was very near. Now is the time when I would have wanted to bestow this armour on my own son, had it been my fortune to have fathered an heir and to live on in the flesh. For 50 years I ruled this nation. No king of any neighbouring clan would dare face me with troops. None had the power to intimidate me. I stood my ground and took what came, cared for the things in my keeping, never fomented quarrels, never swore to a lie. All this consoles me, doomed as I am and sickening for death, because of my right ways. The ruler of mankind need never blame me when the breath leaves my body for murder of kinsmen. Now go quickly, dearest Wiglaf, under the grey stone where the dragon is laid out, lost to his treasure. Hurry to feast your eyes on the hoard. Away you go. I want to examine that ancient gold, gaze my fill on those garnered jewels. My going will be easier for having seen the treasure, a less troubled letting go of the life and lordship I have long maintained. So there's a whole passage where Wiglaf goes in and there's a description of all the jewels and everything, which is rather like the one in The Hobbit. And he sees all these things. He saw too a standard entirely of gold hanging high over the hoard, a masterpiece of filigree. It glowed with light, so he could make out the ground at his feet and inspect the valuables. Of the dragon there was no remaining sign. The sword had dispatched him. So he comes out with the treasure. So he came to the place carrying the treasure and found his lord bleeding profusely, his life at an end. Again he began to swab his body. The beginnings of an utterance heaved up from the coffers of the king's heart. The old lord gazed sadly at the gold. To the everlasting Lord of all, to the King of glory I give thanks, that I behold this treasure here in front of me, that I have thus been allowed to leave my people so well endowed on the day I die. Now that I have bartered my last breath to own this fortune, it is up to you to look after their needs. I can hold out no longer. Wonderful. He's thinking only of his people and giving away what he's given his life to buy. And then he gives his collar of gold to the young thane. Then the king, in his great-heartedness, unclasped the collar of gold from his neck and gave it to the young thane, telling him to use it and the war shirt and the gilded helmet well. You are the last of us, the only one left of the Wigmundings. Fate swept us away, sent my whole brave, high-born clan to their final doom. Now I must follow them. That was the warrior's last word. It's so wonderful. Then there's many more beautiful things to come, but that's just a little taste of it. And you can see how Tolkien drew deeply from that early Anglo-Saxon inheritance. Seamus Heaney has done an absolutely wonderful job. I only wish Tolkien had lived to see this translation. He would have delighted in it. And the name of Tolkien is not absent from this book, because in his introduction, Heaney singles out Tolkien's famous essay, Beowulf, the Monsters and the Critics, as the essay which had most deeply understood this poem, and it inspired him in turn to make this translation. So it's part of a literary lineage, and that's one of the things I love about books, about reading, about libraries, is the way you see one book or one writer, as it were, making something or showing something or saying something which itself generously and generatively begets good writing in others. So anyway, I thought you might like to have a little taste of that in itself, and also as one of Tolkien's sources. Thanks for dropping round.